The Middle East. When you hear that phrase, what comes to mind? Oil? Wars? Religious conflict? Endless headlines about instability? It feels permanent, as if the region was always destined to be divided and at war with itself. But here's the truth. It wasn't. The modern Middle East was created. It was shaped by decisions made far from the desert, in secret meetings in London and Paris. It was born in the shadows of a war that most of the world barely remembers. That war is the First World War, and it's the forgotten war that still defines the Middle East today. This is Roots of the Matter, and here's how World War I made the Middle East what it is. At the dawn of the 20th century, the Middle East was ruled largely by the Ottoman Empire. It wasn't a patchwork of nation-states. It was a vast imperial system centered in Istanbul. From the mountains of Anatolia to the sands of Arabia, from the streets of Damascus to the holy city of Jerusalem, the Ottomans governed it all. Yes, cracks were showing. Nationalist movements stirred among Arabs, Armenians, Kurds, and others. But the Ottoman map still held. And then came 1914, the Great War. When the Ottomans sided with Germany and Austria-Hungary, the Middle East was pulled into the bloodiest conflict the world had ever seen. For Britain and France, the war wasn't just about defeating Germany. It was about preparing for the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. They asked themselves, what happens to this vast territory when the empire falls? Who will control the holy cities of Mecca and Medina? Who will command the oil fields that were just beginning to power modern industry? And so, even as soldiers fought in the trenches, diplomats began drafting the future. Between 1915 and 1917, Britain made 3 promises. Each one changed the Middle East. Each one contradicted the others. Promise 1, the Hussein-McMahon Correspondence. Britain reached out to Sharif Hussein of Mecca, the guardian of Islam's holiest sites. In a series of letters, the British promised, if the Arabs revolted against the Ottomans, Britain would support the creation of an independent Arab kingdom. The Arabs believed them. Sharif Hussein's sons, Faisal and Abdullah, prepared for rebellion. Promise 2, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. At the very same time, Britain made a secret deal with France. The two empires agreed to carve up Ottoman lands after the war. France would get Syria and Lebanon. Britain would take Mesopotamia, today's Iraq, and Palestine. Arab independence, not part of the plan. Promise 3, the Balfour Declaration. In 1917, Britain issued a public letter supporting the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. This was meant to rally Jewish support for the Allied cause, especially in the United States. But for the Arabs already living in Palestine, it was a thunderbolt. So within just 2 years, Britain promised the same land to 3 different groups. Independence for the Arabs, colonial rule for France, a homeland for the Jews. It was a web of contradictions that no treaty could ever fully untangle. On the ground, the promises had real consequences. Sharif Hussein's sons launched the Arab Revolt in 1916, with support from Britain, and with the help of a young intelligence officer named T.E. Lawrence, later immortalized as Lawrence of Arabia. Arab forces attacked Ottoman garrisons and railways. They fought not just for military victory, they fought for independence. They fought believing Britain's word. As Arab troops marched into Damascus in 1918, Prince Faisal believed the dream of an Arab kingdom was about to come true. But then came the betrayal. After the war ended, the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement was revealed. It showed in black and white that Britain and France had never planned to deliver independence. Instead, the Middle East was to be divided like spoils of war. Zones of control. Zones of influence. Lines on a map drawn with rulers in faraway offices. The sense of betrayal among Arabs was immense. They had shed blood for promises that were never real. And that anger, that sense of having been tricked, has echoed ever since. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. By 1920, it was reduced to the territory of modern Turkey. The Arab provinces, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Palestine, Transjordan, were stripped away. The League of Nations handed them to Britain and France as mandates. Mandates were supposed to be temporary, a path to independence. But in practice, they were just colonies under a new name. And here is where today's problems begin. The new borders ignored history, culture, and community. They sliced across tribes, languages, and religions. Kurdish lands were split between Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. Sunnis and Shias were combined in Iraq. Christians, Druze, and Alawites were packed into a fragile Lebanon under French rule. These divisions weren't accidental, they were designed. Divide and rule, weaken unity, make resistance harder. But the lines that were convenient for empire became deadly when independence finally came. Because the divisions remained. And they hardened into national borders that still exist today. Of all the promises, the one with the most lasting impact was the Balfour Declaration. During the Mandate, Britain facilitated Jewish immigration to Palestine. Jewish communities grew. Arab resentment grew with them. By the 1930s, violence was breaking out. Riots, strikes, uprisings. The Arab population felt betrayed. They believed Britain had handed over their homeland. By 1948, when Britain withdrew and Israel declared independence, war exploded. Palestinians were displaced in what they call the Nakba, the catastrophe. Neighboring Arab states invaded, and the conflict has never been resolved. One wartime promise, written in just a few sentences in 1917, shaped a century of conflict. Let's look at two more creations of World War I, Iraq and Syria. Iraq was stitched together from three Ottoman provinces, Basra, Baghdad, and Mosul. Different peoples, different histories, Sunnis in Baghdad, Shias in the south, Kurds in the north. Britain installed King Faisal, Sharif Hussein's son, as monarch. It was an outsider monarchy ruling a divided state. Unrest was inevitable. Syria was given to France. But instead of fostering unity, France divided it into mini-states, Alawite, Druze, Greater Lebanon, Damascus, and Aleppo. The idea was to weaken nationalism by splintering communities, but Syrian nationalism only grew stronger. When independence came after World War II, both Iraq and Syria were already unstable. Coup, dictatorships, and foreign interventions became the pattern. And then, there was oil. By the 1910s, oil was the lifeblood of modern warfare. Britain's navy had switched from coal to oil. Securing oil supplies became a strategic obsession. That's why Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, was so valuable. The British made sure it landed in their zone under Sykes-Picot. The Middle East's destiny was no longer just about geography or religion. It was about resources that outsiders wanted. And once oil wealth was discovered, it fueled both prosperity and endless foreign interference. By the 1920s, the shape of the modern Middle East was set, but it was set not by its people, but by outsiders. Arabs remembered the promises. They remembered the letters, the declarations, the secret deals. They remembered being told independence was coming, and then seeing their lands carved up. That sense of betrayal hardened into mistrust. It colored relations with the West for generations, and it became part of the political DNA of the region. Even today, when leaders denounce Western influence, they often point back to Sykes-Picot as the original wound. In the West, World War I is remembered for trenches in France and battles in Belgium. In school books, the Middle East is barely mentioned. But in the region itself, the memory is alive. Because people still live within the borders drawn in 1916 and 1920, they still live with the promises broken in 1917. They still live with the consequences of a war that outsiders have forgotten. Think about today's news. The conflict in Israel and Palestine, the instability of Iraq, the war in Syria, the rise of Kurdish nationalism. Even ISIS once declared its mission to erase the artificial borders created by Sykes-Picot. Every headline you see has roots in the First World War. The war may be forgotten in the West, but its shadow stretches across the Middle East every single day. It's easy to talk about maps and treaties, but let's not forget the people caught in the middle. Arab fighters who believed they were battling for freedom. Jewish settlers who believed they were coming home. Communities torn apart by lines they never chose. The legacy of those decisions isn't just political, it's human. It's measured in displacement, in mistrust, in wars that still rage. So, when we look at the Middle East today, it's tempting to say, it's always been like this. That division and violence are somehow inevitable. But history tells a different story. The Middle East wasn't destined to be unstable. It was made this way, made by letters written in secret, by lines drawn with rulers, by promises that could never all be kept. World War I is remembered as Europe's tragedy. But for the Middle East, it was the birth of a new and painful reality. A century later, we still live with its consequences, because history doesn't end when treaties are signed. It lingers, it shapes, it divides. The First World War is the forgotten war that made the Middle East what it is. And to understand today, we have to go back to the roots of the matter. That's it on this second edition of our new YouTube channel, Roots of the Matter. We aim to upload at least one of this type of video each week. So, let us know what other past wars or treaties you'd like us to give a similar treatment. And kindly subscribe to the channel. Also share this video with your network of friends. It will help us grow. Thank you.